Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. We're so glad you could join us. I'm Ellen. I'm part of the team here at Navigate, and I'll be your tech support person during the session today. Before we jump in, I'll quickly run through a few housekeeping items. I'll just let everyone know that the session is being recorded. We'll ask that everyone please keep your mics muted and your cameras turned off to keep background noise and distractions to a minimum during the presentation. If at any point during the session you run into technical problems, please send me a direct message in the chat and I'll be happy to help you out. If you have a question during the presentation, you can send it in the chat at any point, and we'll have time for a conversation at the end of the presentation, and we'll cover any questions from the chat at that point. If you'd like to join in the conversation, please use the reaction function at the bottom of your screen to raise your hand, and we'll ask you to unmute your mic. And now I'll hand things over to Maureen.
Hey everybody, welcome. We're again super excited to be having a conversation today. My name's Maureen and I'm the co-founder of Navigate Food Safety with my partner Alex Hanley, who you'll hear lots from today. What we're shooting for today is a conversation about leading the food safety charge. Now, I'm just going to preface by saying everybody thinks they're the only ones who are messy under the hood. Everybody thinks everybody else has it figured out. It's not true. This is a challenge for the majority of people that we've met with and in plants where we've visited. So I feel like I say the same thing every time we introduce a topic, and it all goes back to culture. And there's a reason why culture is a hot topic in the industry right now. So you're not alone and you're in good company. And thanks for joining us today. I'm going to turn things over to Alex and I'm looking forward to a good discussion later on. So please keep your questions in mind, pop them in the chat, because the more you participate, the better value this has for everybody. Over to you, Alex.
All right. So we want to look at whoops, my screen. Okay, so we want to look at what it means to be committed to food safety. And usually when we talk about commitment, we talk about upper management. So the first thing we'll do is we'll set the stage by defining management's role in food safety. And once we've done that, we'll look at what it means to be committed from a management system perspective. And that means we will look at performance indicators, because performance indicators, they're the tools and management system that we use to measure performance. And that means, and it takes a lot of commitment to perform. So in a way, when we perform, it shows that, that we're committed. So we'll see what KPIs would be good indicators of commitment, and what KPIs might be indicators of not so good commitment. And after that, Maureen is going to talk a little bit about management styles and about the impact that day-to-day actions have on food safety. So we'll look first at kind of the big picture, the setting the direction that way. And then Maureen's going to talk about setting the tone on a day-to-day basis, because that has a tremendous impact on commitment. It's got an impact on food safety and therefore an impact on commitment. Once that's all done, we'll have time for a discussion. Hopefully this will have raised a few questions and we'll take it from there. And if not, we've got a few questions ready ourselves. So what's management roles when it comes to food safety? Well, there's 4 parts to that. The first part is management sets the direction for the facility. So if we use the analogy of a captain on a boat, they set the course. This is where we're going. This is where everybody's going. That's what management decides that. Then they keep the ship going in the right direction. And this is where we're going. They make sure that we're going where we want to go. In order to do that, there's a lot of things they need to do that. They need to keep informed. They need to where we are, where we're going. They need to understand the information that's coming at them. So they need to be involved, you know. That's the second part of their role. The third part of their role is if the ship is, we're supposed to be going there and we're going that way, if, you know, then it's their job to course correct. When the ship's going in the right direction, they don't have to do so much, but when the ship's in the wrong course, then they have to bring it back on course by holding people accountable. Sometimes they growl a little bit, sometimes they coach people. There's different ways of doing it. Sometimes they have a fit. Sometimes, you know, the best way to bring the ship back on course is to allocate resources, allocate, you know, people, money, equipment, and materials, etc. So they do that because they want to be profitable, because they want the company to perform, but also because they want to stay out of trouble. Because the fourth part of their role is to, if there's a crisis, if something goes wrong, whether it's their fault or somebody else's fault on the team, or if it's just plain bad luck, it's always them that's on deck when there's a crisis. It's their role to manage situations. And actually, you know what, if they mess that up, if somebody ends up going to jail, it's also part of their role. So they've got a pretty good incentive to do that one right. All this being said, if we look at the commitment, we can see how these four roles work together, but it all starts with setting the direction. And that's where the commitment, that's why there's such an emphasis on management commitment in food safety standards and in management system in general. And so we're going to start with setting the direction. And we're going to start by looking at what are the most common performance indicators. So I'll use performance indicators, KPIs, well, the key performance indicators, KPIs, and food safety objectives. I'll use those interchangeably because they're the same thing. One is, KPIs is the way we talk about it in the industry in general, and the food safety objectives is the way the GFSI looks at the key performance indicators in the context of the benchmark food safety standards. So I'll use KPIs most of the time. What are the KPIs that most food safety, most food manufacturers use? It's very simple. Like 99% of the plants that I've seen, or and when I talk with my friends, like auditors and all that, this is what most people use. People want to have 0 recalls, they want to have a great GFSI score, and they want to reduce complaints. Now, those are all things that we all want, and it's true, it's very universal. They're very commendable as objectives. I mean, who wants a recall, really? Who wants complaints? Who doesn't want a good score? They're all very good. They're just not good food safety objectives. Now, that statement might come as a shock. And let me explain the difference between a food safety objective and something that's not really a food safety objective. And I'll use a different analogy. We've talked about boating. We'll talk about a bit of health for a second. If I said, I have a pulse, and therefore I am very healthy, what would you think? Would you think that having a pulse is a good indicator of being healthy? And the way to answer that question is to say, well, what's the difference between someone who has a pulse and someone who doesn't have a pulse? And really, it's the difference between, it's not the difference between somebody healthy and somebody not healthy. It's the difference between somebody who's alive and somebody who is not alive, somebody who's dead. People who don't have a pulse typically are dead. People who have a pulse typically are alive. And therefore, a pulse is a great indicator of aliveness or of deadness. It's not a great indicator of health or lack of health. And in the exact same way, the 3 indicators that we looked at are not really indicators of great food safety performance. If you don't have a recall, you're just part of the 99% of food companies who didn't have a recall this year. Or maybe you even had a critical failure and nobody ever noticed, or it didn't go public and you didn't get a recall. So it's possible to have a very poor performance in food safety and not have a recall. So that's an example of why not having a recall is not much of a performance, doesn't show how you're performing. One could even argue that having a recall, a successful recall, is a better performance than a food safety incident going unnoticed and not acting on it. So don't get me wrong, we don't want recalls and all that, but they're just not a good performance indicator. If we look at the commitment to a good score for an audit, in order for an objective to be valid, the objective there needs to be a direct correlation between the measure and the outcome. And there's many ways to be certified these days. And some of those ways are aligned with making safe food, and some of those ways are not aligned with making safe food. And I'm sure you all have, you can all think of ways that that you work towards certification that are not necessarily working towards food safety. But when there's a big cleanup before the audit, like when everybody's on deck for 2 weeks or a month before the audit cleaning up, that's not about food safety. Let's be very clear. This is all about the audit and about certification, and it's not necessarily aligned with food safety. What would be aligned with food safety would be cleaning, maintaining that level of cleanliness all year long, doing exactly what the auditor likes to see. When the auditor says, oh, well, I want to see this, and you say, oh, yeah, let's do that. That's aligned with certification, but not aligned necessarily with food safety. If you're sending someone in the, in the rooms just before the audit walks in a room, and you send someone to go and check and make sure that everything is nip and tuck, a scout they call. Well, if you're sending a scout, it's a great way to be certified, not aligned with food safety. And there's many other examples. Point is, a good score is not necessarily aligned with food safety, so it's not a good indicator. Same general idea applies with complaints. There's no direct link with reducing complaints and making safe food. You can reduce complaint and still have unsafe food. You can make safe food and not impact your complaints because you're working on things that nobody ever notices. If there's gear oil leaking in the product and you fix that, you are improving food safety, but you're not going to act. It's not going to impact complaints because nobody's ever going to notice that gear oil being mixed in the product. So complaints is not a great indicator of food safety. The question is, how did we get there? Why are we using those performance indicators? And the first part of the question is, I would say, we're using those performance indicators because in theory, performance indicators are a driver to all of our programs. But in reality, we choose performance indicators because of the audit. So we have to look at what are the pressures that come from the audit for us to choose those KPIs. And really the way it works is standards say objectives, and it says objectives with an S. So we can't have a single objective. We have to have more than one. 2 would be a little bit suspicious. So let's say 3 objectives, and most people settle for 3 objectives. And then the standard says there needs to be a clear measure of success, but auditors really like things that are measurable, above or below 95%, above or below 3 per year, or that kind of stuff. And so we take something that's measurable. So we also, if people are doing it for the audit, those 3, which are the most common, are very easy. So once you've established those as objectives, it's not much of a stretch for the company to meet them. So I hate to say, but it doesn't require, it looks like most people are happy with saying, okay, we've dealt with objectives. We don't have to think about it for the rest of the year. We'll report on them on a quarterly basis. And so we'll tick all the boxes for the audit, and that's it. What auditors do not measure is whether the objectives are meaningful. Now, in the standards, they say that you need to be using those objectives to drive continuous improvement. In other words, those objectives have to have a meaningful impact on your systems, on the way that you manage food safety. This is a requirement in all of the benchmark standards. It is a requirement that is very difficult to monitor for an auditor because it's not black and white. It's not above or below 5 or above or below 95%. So it's difficult to monitor. And what's even more difficult is when you find that those objectives are not really driving improvement, it's really hard to write a non-conformance against that. So auditors are a little bit in a bind, so they just kind of don't look at it. And I think that's how we end up with, with those objectives. So, I mean, one way to say, why are we looking at those objectives? Why do we all have those objectives would be to say, oh, because we're doing it just for the audit. Another way to look at it, maybe a bit less cynical way of looking at it, would be to say that people choose those objectives because they don't really know how to choose objectives. They don't know how to select KPIs that will set a strong direction towards food safety. And if a person had the kind of that less cynical vision, he might be tempted to help the industry by doing a little webinar on how to be committed to food safety by setting up meaningful food safety KPIs. And that'd be a pretty good thought. And that's what we're working on as we speak. So if you wanted to do that first step, like if you wanted to set the direction for the facility in a way that's really committed to food safety using KPIs, the first thing you'd do is you'd need to have meaningful objectives. And what does meaningful mean in terms of food safety? Meaningful means that the objectives are aligned with not just with the needs of the certification, but also with the needs of what it takes to make your product safe. In other words, what are the risks in your facility? So looking at risk, and risk is very specific to your industry, to your facility. So we need to know, we need to align the KPIs with the standard, but also with the risk for your facility. That's the first thing we need to do. And then the second thing we need to do is we need to have a measure that differentiates good performance from poor performance. If the KPI or if the objective is something that you can achieve with your eyes closed, it's not driving anything, you know? So we need something that will, yeah, as I said, that will separate the wheat from the chaff. That, you know, that is a bit of a stretch. That requires good management, because if we want to use, because that's what those performance indicators are in the end. They help us see if we're managing properly. So the recipe for that is going to be pretty simple. First, we're going to identify the risk for your facility. What are the high risk factors? Then we're going to decide on the denominator, so the unit measure that we're going to use to compare things. And then we're going to decide on the limit that's kind of above or below. And we'll learn that with examples. So, you know, first we need to identify a risk. So if we think of foreign material is a risk for every industry, so everybody can use that. But then other risks are going to be dependent on your specific industry. If you think of, you know, anything that's ready to eat, dairy, meat, you know, ready to eat meat products, micro and environmental monitoring is going to be, they're going to be big issues. If you think of baking, rodents certainly is going to be a big issue, like more dry products. Rodents are going to be an issue. In some industries, insects are going to be an issue, and so on and so forth. Sometimes you'll have foreign, you know, you'll have field-related foreign material for anything that brings in raw agriculture products. Your product, your risk. First step. Second step is we need to define a denominator. So what's the frequency, or what's going to be the unit measure? If it's something that happens once or twice a year, there's no sense having a monitor. You can monitor and you can report per week or per period, but really your objective needs to be based on the kind of frequency of things happening. So if something happens, you know, twice a year, then you take a yearly objective. If it's something that happens twice a month, or, you know, once a period or once a week might be a better indicator. Sometimes your events happen based on the volume of product that you make. In that case, we'll use volume. We'll see an example in a minute. And then once that's done, you set a limit, you know, and the limit again has to separate good from bad. And let's look at a few examples to see how that works. So if we look at rodents in baking, like rodents is just because of the way bread is distributed and the racks that come back to the bakeries and that are stored outside by the stores, there's a lot of rodents in the whole supply chain in baking. And so we can say rodents would be a very significant risk in baking. Now the denominator, once a quarter is a just by experience is a limit that we see is working. And the difference between, you know, between performing, between being in control and not being in control could be said to be 2 mice per quarter. If you're starting to get, like, you know, the odd mouse once in a while is okay. If there's 2 of them that walk in, if you get that consistently quarter after quarter, it might be a problem. But generally speaking, 2 mice is good. Anytime there's rat activity, then that's, you know, those limits are, it's a red flag. So those would be examples of very significant performance indicators for baking. We look at another example, we look at bugs in flour mills. So in a mill, one of the biggest challenge is cleaning the mill. And then you've got, the bugs. If you don't clean well, bugs are going to show up. You can have bugs inside the mill, outside the mill. Inside of the mill, any bug, they'll end up in the final sifter. And that's where that's what we're going to be using as our food safety indicator. We want to stay below a certain number of insects per, a certain number of insects. The challenge there is you've got big mills and small mills, and how do you, so many insects per day or per week or per month doesn't really, you want to be able to compare different size mills. So what we use a bulk load. So how many bulk loads or equivalent of bulk loads does the mill do? If they do 30 bulk loads, then, you can have 10 times as many insects as a mill that would be doing 10 bulk loads a day, And so basically, if we say 3 insects per bulk load, that would be kind of the industry average, or the line separating good performance for poor performance. Really, a really good performance would be 0 or 1 insect on average, and then 1 to 2 would be kind of getting yellow. And then when you're at 3, you're saying, "Oof, we need to act very quickly now." Those are 2 examples of very industry-specific performance indicators. We could have used micro or environmental monitoring, which applies to everybody. We could have used foreign material, which applies to everybody, but I wanted to use something that's where we can see a very specific, risk, and how you can expand on the more general items. But I've got an example that applies to everybody. The next example is breakdown. So in any facility, you have maintenance or mechanical breakdown. You can have all kinds of breakdown, and everybody tracks, either OEE or minutes of downtime. And those are good food safety indicators, because the more your equipment breaks down, the higher are the odds of some contamination. So those are good indicators. But in and of itself, I've got a better one that I want to talk about. Sometimes the equipment breakdowns and a bearing seizes and the line shuts down, or there's a jam or something happens, and it's got no impact on food safety directly, like that you can measure. And other times there's going to be contamination. Gear oil leaks in the soup, or something scrapes and there's a bunch of metal filings that fall in the product. So when those events happen, you need to track them. And so that's a very significant food safety risk. And you can count how many of those happen in your facility and say, how many per quarter of those would happen. Now, I don't have a number here to say what would be a good target or a poor target. What I would say is that, because I've seen a lot of variability between facilities, some processes have a lot more breakdowns. It happens a lot more often. And in other facilities, it happens almost never. I've seen a lot of facilities where you could have 1 or 2 of those events in a year, or maybe not even 1. And I've seen others where you'd have like 20 or 30, and it's just something that happens because of the complexity of the equipment and of the process. That's a great performance indicator. And then, once, the other thing I wanted to show was, when you take that, and I've talked about, the breakdown rate here in terms of either OEE or minutes of breakdown, then you can think of the maintenance breakdown affecting food safety, less than 2 per year, I gave as an example here. And then we could add some more indicators that have also an impact on food safety. You could say that the maintenance work orders that are past 30 days, the maintenance work orders that are past 60 days, we could want maintenance to trend to look at all of their breakdowns and see, are there any trends? And we could want them to do that on a certain frequency. And when we add those performance indicators, we can come up with a scorecard by department. And each department can have each department is important in terms of food safety. So each department will have an impact, and therefore could have some performance indicators related to them. So basically, all that being said, that's the end of my presentation. These are a few examples of how to drive improvement using performance indicators. The whole point is that if we choose carefully our performance indicators, we will, we'll be monitoring the things that are most important for our facility, and then explaining how we're committed to food safety would be as simple as explaining the actions that we take to perform on those indicators. And performance indicators is something that management is really paying attention to, and they're really good at talking to them. So it's a good way for them to demonstrate their commitment. All that being said, I will turn it to Maureen, who will talk about management styles and will bring things a lot closer to our day-to-day actions.
Thanks, Alex. I think right now I just want to mention that Ellen's popped a note in the chat, just saying if you have any questions. I see a couple of questions coming in there. If you have any questions or comments about what Alex is presenting, feel free to pop them in there or save them for later on. Make yourself a note for the chat. But anyway, that feature's there. So I think I just want to step in and talk about how you're going to manage effectively to lead the food safety charge. It's all well and good. We can establish KPIs and decide what we're shooting for. We know what needs to be done. We're going to figure out how to do it. We're going to measure. We're going to hold people accountable. But we also know that talking about it and doing it are two different things. We can make plans in the office, and then when you go to the floor or you go to your management team meeting, getting people to do things is a different ball of wax. So when it comes to managing effectively to lead change, whether it's food safety or any other type, your day-to-day actions are extremely important. They're also a bit less about what you do and more about how you do it when you're the leader or the manager. As managers, we often work in the status quo. This is what we do. This is how we get it done. But the very best management comes from being a good leader. We talk about management and leadership separately, but we need to be both. Think about your own work history. If there was a manager who was a good leader in there, I bet you could name them right now. Quite likely, you knew their vision. You felt like you were in on it with them, and you knew that how you did your work really mattered to that vision. So you not only worked for that manager, but you followed them. So if you want to be a good leader, it's important to be innovative and to consider new things. That's why we're here today. We're thinking about something new, or we're willing to try something new or to listen to something new. Good leaders also take it a step further, and they include thinking about the people. What makes my team tick? How can we inspire people to go with us on this journey, or how can we make it meaningful to them? If you want people to follow you, you have to earn and inspire their trust, and that's where the day-to-day comes in. Like, how do you do that? Well, you show people the way. You lead by example. You're engaged, and you're willing to coach them when they need it. And you focus some of your real focus falls on teamwork, getting people to gel, and motivating them. So we've all seen, management and leadership evolve along the way. In the past, leaders were chosen because of power, influence, family, money, title, gender, even height, would be a factor in somebody being appointed or chosen. But these days, management and leadership choices are more based on behavior. And when it comes to behaviors, there are different styles in leadership. We've all seen this: authoritative. I'm the boss. I instruct. I demonstrate. This is your job. You follow, no questions. Then the other extreme is laid back. They show up, demonstrate what needs to be done. More of a role model. Think about Mother Teresa. She never told anyone how to do anything. She just did it, and people followed. For this style, you have to be highly engaged and highly visible. And there's diplomatic. There's a lot more give and take. You develop relationships, you collaborate, you cooperate with your team, and you kind of get things done together. Currently, diplomatic is the style that curries the most favor and seems to be the way that most people are getting things done. That being said, on any given day, you may need to be all three of these, depending on what you're involved in. in a day-to-day when things are going well, diplomatic or laid back may work really, really well. You know, if you're managing change, you may need to embrace a bit more of one or the other. And as Alex says, when it comes to a crisis and you are assuming responsibility, you may need to be 100% authoritative. You need to lead the charge, take no prisoners, instruct everyone, and your word is the deed. The upside is no one will question you if you've laid the foundation well by being a good leader all along the way in your small and big actions. People will trust you and they will follow their leader in times of crisis. And as a matter of fact, they relish following their leader in times of crisis. So I could talk about this all day and the attributes, but in the interest of time, I've got a bit of advice from the trenches about how real people lead every day, because we talk to lots of people and we hear lots of stories. So our friend Melanie, who's a fantastic leader in the industry and has been for many, many years, she stresses the importance of setting your intention, being deliberate, and also being transparent. She understands people are watching you. They're watching what you do. They're actually looking to see if you're walking the talk. She has an actual checklist for how to set the tone as a leader when you go in the plant. Number one, take the time to talk to people on the floor. And by that, she means really talk to people on the floor. Also, number two, make sure you have time to deal with something. If there's a situation and you're there, make sure you've built in some extra time on your visit. Don't be in a rush when you're walking through the plant. You're there for a reason and you're giving it good attention. You want to hear from people. You want to see what's going on. And then third, you have to take action if you see something happening, and you have to follow through all the way. Impact of not taking action, people think you don't care, and they attribute that to management not caring. And then that goes right back to the culture of management doesn't care, so we don't have to care. Another story is during a fireside chat with Scott McCain of the McCain family, he told me that his favorite activity is to get out on the floor in a facility. He'll get his reports from the managers, from the owners, from the CEOs, all that good information. But he says, if you really want to know what's going on, you have a deep conversation with someone on the floor. He also says, if you stay there long enough, they will tell you everything you need to know about the culture and what's really going on in the plant. I love that. And recently at the OFPA spring session, there was a great panel on commitment to food safety at the management level. So Catherine de Tomasau from Walmart Canada says they have 4 very public basic beliefs they subscribe to as an organization: respect for the individual, strive for excellence, customer always, and integrity. So food safety falls under all the categories, but the integrity piece is really the most important to them. And how do they practically add that? They embed food safety within every operational practice, and they don't treat food safety as an additional or separate component. So there's one seamless view of how to do something, and that includes food safety. So it can't be pushed off to the side or treated as an afterthought. I think that's awesome. Lori Sawyer from Goodleaf Farms in that same panel says they track trends to measure how they're doing. And so a good example of one of the trends they track is whether or not concerns are brought to their attention by operators rather than being hidden. They consider that a good indication of how much employees care and how much employees trust that there will be action and that things are going well. They also ensure their mission statement includes the word safe, producing safe, great food made in a safe environment. And she also offered some really good advice from her perspective, including don't seek to implement a food safety culture, but rather get to know your current culture and change it. And by that, you're going to have to get on the floor, be a good listener, and really want to know and be ready to hear what's really going on, and then becoming really good at change management. So all that to say, as a manager, you don't actually have to do it alone. You can set the tone as a leader, and remember that you're leading at all times in your actions, big and small. You're sending a message. Think about what that message is. A series of small actions over time can really bring great change. So you can set the direction, lead the charge, lead your people. They'll not only follow you, but they'll protect your wins. If you clearly communicate that you have a desired state and you demonstrate that you are in it to win it, people will follow and they'll work towards the goal and they'll own it. And if they own it, that's really culture. So if you've worked hard on something like we own food safety, or even embracing everybody is responsible for food safety, the people who joined you on that path are not going to let it drop, even when no one's looking. They'll call it out if somebody else drops the ball, because you've shown them that as an organization, you care about this. You own it and you're going to have their back. They trust if they report something, it's not going to fall on deaf ears. So if you're working on implementing something new, such as KPIs for food safety, check your inner leader as well as your actions and goals. It's so much easier to lead and have your team follow than it is to have, to drag them kicking and screaming, or worse yet, kicking and not saying anything at all. So that's just a few words on how to lead change as a manager. And I think we are now ready for some conversation. And I assume that there might be some questions in the chat. Okay, there's a lot of questions in the chat. Alex, one for you. Are the numbers that you're giving the norm or just an example?
The numbers that I'm giving, so if you're talking about the numbers for rodents, okay, I gave a few numbers. I said 99%. Those statistics are always made on the spot. They're not made on the spot, but they're kind of more of a general appreciation. So it's not based on the survey. If you think of the numbers for rodents in bakeries and bugs in milling, those are industry, they're industry norms. Yeah. Okay, so they're good. They're real numbers. I didn't make them up.
Okay, great. Yeah, exactly. I have another question, and this could be for both of us. I suppose if everybody wants to turn on their cameras to join the chat, that's fantastic. If you're feeling comfortable. Alex, what advice do you have for developing a teamwork environment where the leader leads, but the rest of the team works in lockstep to support one another?
Well, that is very interesting. So one of the things that happens with performance indicators is that, as I said, auditors really like, if we're doing the audit, if we're using the indicators for the audit, then we're going for what the auditor wants. If we're using the indicators for driving change, then we need to look at what it takes to change. And there's two types of changes. There is an incremental change where things are getting slowly better, a little bit at a time, in which case a measurable objective is useful. And there is what we call a step change. We are doing things this way now, and we want to do things that way in the future. So working as a team is not something that you can measure. You can't say, oh, we're at an 82% or at the 51% teamwork, and we'd like to really get at a 62. It doesn't work that way. It's a step change. So it's a qualitative change as opposed to a quantitative change. And in this case, using qualitative objectives is what you would need to do. An example of a qualitative change or objectives is to say, okay, we want to work as a team. And so we would, it's a good question. We'll talk about that at length in the next webinar, really, but where we look at setting the team up for success. But no, what does I say? You need to define when we work with teams that are going to be kind of doing a step change, we look at what their goals are, and based on their goals, then those become the objectives. So simplifying or working as a team is a goal, and we could say, do we have a process to work as a team? Yes or no. And that's a kind of a yes, no objective. And normally people don't have a process. And then after, then we can say, okay, we've got a process. Is it, and that's a great objective to start with. After that, once you've made that step, you can say, okay, well, how well is that working? Do we have engagement? And once you go from not having a process, not working as a team to, okay, we have a process, we have engagement, but the engagement is not as good as we would like to, we've made the step change, and then we can do an incremental change. And then we can start looking at how do we measure engagement. And if I had 20 minutes, I could talk about it for 20 minutes. So I'll say maybe we can look at another question, or if not,
I have another question.
if you have another question.
Ernesto would like to clarify. 2 mice and some insects are accepted as the norm. Is 0 pests that hard to achieve?
Well, and there's the story. Okay, so like I'm saying, this is the upper, like this is the limit. Okay, if you have a company that has, it gets a bit more complicated than that, but like 0 pest in a flour mill is not a reasonable expectation. 0 pest is not a reasonable expectation, I would say, generally speaking. Now, is it impossible to achieve? No, it's not impossible, because when we look at all of the mills or all of the food plants, there's a lot of food plants that will have no pest. But just because a plant has a few pests doesn't mean that they're out of control. So if I rephrase that, is most of the plant, or the indicator is not based on what is possible for one plant. But when you look at the whole industry, it is just not the case right now that the mills are free from insect, or that the bakeries are free from rodents, or that the green bean canning plants, once in a while you get, because green beans come in from the field and then you harvest them. And if there's a couple of crickets in there, they end up with the beans in the plant. And because they kind of look similar after they've been cleaned, or not cleaned, but after the beans have, gone through the process, once in a while you'll get a complaint for a cricket or a grasshopper in the beans. And getting to 0.0 is what we want to shoot for, but it's not what we're going to use to measure, are we doing good or not good? And so every industry has got some issues that do happen, and we always strive for 0, but we don't necessarily expect that something other than 0 would be a fail. Is that answer the question? Is that clear?
That's great, Alex. And you know what? We're coming up on 45 minutes after the hour, so I'm just going to stick to our promise to wrap up on time. For anybody who wants to stay on for a few minutes, we're going to hang out for the rest of for 15 minutes after the hour for anybody who wants to stick around and have more conversation. But for anybody who didn't have their lunch yet, we're going to wrap it up. So yeah, so just a few words. We have another webinar coming up on June 1st, how to make a step change, where we'll talk about something we see quite often, which is a plant is certified, they're doing all the right moves, but they're still facing challenges and they pretty much know things can be better, or there's something chronic going on. So we're going to talk about step change on June 1st for anybody who's interested. Ellen will drop a link in the chat. At Navigate, we're taking an active approach to resolving multiple issues at the plant, at the corporate level, and within the certification industry itself. We're working with CPOs and CBs on a refresher training for lead auditors. We have online trainings and master classes. The list is on your screen. We also do customized training. We like to build capacity and pretty much avoid theory if we can. So if you enjoyed the conversation today, please reach out. You can find us at any touch points that are on your screen. We also have a Facebook community. Ellen will drop a link in the chat. All feedback's good feedback. And just a reminder that this is the stuff that gets us out of bed in the morning and gets us excited. What you see as a challenge, we see as an opportunity to bring a solution to the industry. So thanks to Alex and to Ellen for the support. And for those wrapping up now, enjoy the rest of your day. And for those sticking around for the next few minutes, feel free to turn on your camera and we'll continue the conversation. Have a great day and thanks.